Welcome to True Crime Threads. Today we uncover the chilling story of betrayal and murder. In a quiet suburban neighborhood, 26-year-old Luna Thompson seemed to be on the path to recovery. She was soft-spoken, thoughtful, and known for a bright smile that masked her inner turmoil. Those who knew her were aware that her life had been marked by a series of struggles, most stemming from a difficult past she kept hidden. For years, she tried to keep her personal challenges at bay, focusing on her job and spending time with close friends. But it became clear that she needed help dealing with the emotional scars that haunted her. Eventually, Luna took a leap of faith and sought professional help, setting up sessions with Dr. Daniel Foster, a local therapist known for his empathy and professionalism. Dr. Foster was a well-respected figure in the mental health field, with over 2 decades of experience. His reputation for compassion and skillful guidance attracted clients from all backgrounds. With a calm and approachable demeanor, he was known for being able to connect with patients on a deeply personal level, making them feel understood and supported. To Luna, Dr. Foster's office felt like a safe haven, a place where she could finally confront the traumas that weighed heavily on her. In the beginning, her sessions went as expected. Dr. Foster listened patiently, offering insight and encouraging her to open up. Luna felt a connection that she'd never felt with any other therapist. She believed this was her chance to finally gain control of her life. But as the months went by, the relationship between Luna and Dr. Foster shifted subtly. Their conversations began to stray beyond the professional boundaries she initially expected. Instead of strictly focusing on her therapy, Dr. Foster occasionally shared personal anecdotes from his life, which made Luna feel special, as if he saw her as more than just a patient. Initially, she saw these moments as a sign of trust, a rare and unexpected bond with someone who truly understood her pain. Over time, the connection between them deepened, and Luna's trust grew. She confided in him more and more, often divulging secrets she'd never shared with anyone. As she became increasingly reliant on Dr. Foster, her view of him started to shift from a therapist to someone who, she believed, genuinely cared about her as a person. Her feelings grew complicated, and what began as admiration soon became attraction. She convinced herself that he reciprocated these feelings, as he started scheduling extra sessions and even suggested occasional meetings outside the office. The blurred lines of their interactions made Luna believe she was special to him, fueling her attachment. In her mind, the sessions were no longer just about therapy, they were about connection, an intimacy she had been missing in her life. For Dr. Foster, however, things weren't as innocent. Unknown to Luna, he had a pattern of crossing boundaries with vulnerable patients, and her attachment to him fit perfectly into his agenda. Luna, blinded by her growing feelings, didn't see the warning signs that might have indicated she was being manipulated. What she interpreted as deep personal interest was actually a calculated act on his part, a tactic he'd employed with other patients before her. Dr. Foster's professional charm concealed a darker side, one that used the guise of therapy to fulfill his own needs. Despite the unethical nature of their interactions, Luna didn't question the relationship. She was captivated by the attention and convinced that this bond could somehow heal her lingering wounds. To her, it was a once-in-a-lifetime connection, a rare opportunity to rebuild herself. Her hope for personal transformation overshadowed any doubts she might have had about the appropriateness of their growing intimacy. Friends and family noticed subtle changes in her behavior, but she brushed off their concerns, choosing instead to focus on the emotional fulfillment she thought she'd found with Dr. Foster. Gradually, Luna's life began to revolve around these sessions. Her happiness depended on their meetings, and she became increasingly invested in this secret relationship. She overlooked his moments of aloofness, rationalizing them as just part of his professional demeanor. Any reservations she might have had were buried by the comfort and excitement she felt. She'd fallen deeply into his influence, unaware that what she saw as healing was actually leading her into a dangerous, manipulative trap. Luna's transformation did not go unnoticed by her friends and family. Once a warm, cheerful presence, she now seemed consumed by anxiety, her once bright spirit dampened by something they couldn't quite understand. She withdrew from gatherings, choosing to spend most of her time alone or finding excuses to stay away from her usual circles. Her closest friends tried to reach out, sensing that something was wrong, but Luna was evasive, dodging their questions and reassuring them with vague explanations. Her appearance changed too. She grew more restless, often looking tired with dark circles under her eyes, and she began losing weight. The people who loved her started to worry that she was losing herself to something unknown and potentially dangerous. On one occasion, a friend finally managed to break through Luna's wall, coaxing her into confiding some details about what was going on. Luna admitted she was involved with someone unavailable, someone she described as intelligent, understanding, and seemingly perfect. But she was quick to brush off the subject, sharing only a few cryptic details. Her friend didn't press her, sensing that Luna was holding back something too complex or painful to fully reveal. While her friend suspected Luna was in an unhealthy relationship, the full truth that she was involved with her therapist remained hidden, locked away with the secrecy that bound her to Dr. Foster. Meanwhile, Luna's once reliable routine started to fall apart. She frequently called in sick to work, missed deadlines, and her usually meticulous habits grew erratic. Friends would sometimes see her pacing in public places, seemingly lost in thought or filled with nervous energy, eyes darting around as if she were being watched. Luna, once calm and measured, was now wound-tight, operating in a state of near constant tension. What had once been the solace of her therapy sessions had transformed into a source of anxiety. Dr. Foster's behavior, which she had initially found reassuring and comforting, had grown unpredictable. He was no longer the steady presence she had believed him to be, and his demeanor began shifting between affectionate and cold, leaving her feeling increasingly off balance. At the clinic, subtle warning signs were beginning to appear, although they were easy to miss if you didn't know where to look. Dr. Foster's colleagues noticed that he seemed more withdrawn and tense than usual. He was often absent, taking unexpected breaks and having closed-door meetings that ran long into the evening. While his professional exterior remained intact, small cracks were starting to show, especially around his sessions with Luna. Rumors began circulating among the clinic staff, whispers that he might be getting too involved with certain patients, though no one had the evidence to confirm their suspicions. For those closest to Dr. Foster, these changes were concerning, but they couldn't imagine the extent of his entanglement with Luna. At the same time, Luna was growing increasingly anxious about her connection with Dr. Foster. She had initially seen their relationship as something special, even life-changing. But now she sensed something darker lurking beneath the surface. His moods were unpredictable, swinging from warmth to detachment without warning. Luna would often leave sessions feeling more anxious than before, her thoughts muddled and her heart racing. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was losing control over her life, that her once promising path to healing had turned into something far more disturbing. Every time she considered ending the relationship, a part of her hesitated, paralyzed by a fear she couldn't fully understand. Dr. Foster seemed to have a hold on her, a power that went beyond the walls of his office. She wondered if he had manipulated her feelings all along, that perhaps she had misread his attention and kindness. And yet she couldn't bring herself to walk away. The depth of her attachment to him left her trapped in an emotional web, unable to see a clear way out. When she stopped attending her sessions temporarily, Dr. Foster began reaching out to her personally, each message tinged with an insistence that made her stomach twist. His words became more insistent, his tone shifting from professional concern to something more possessive. Despite the fear building within her, Luna couldn't shake the belief that she was somehow responsible for the chaos unfolding in her life. She struggled to rationalize his erratic behavior, telling herself that it must be a reflection of her own flaws, her own insecurities. She was unable to see that the power imbalance was not her fault, nor could she recognize that Dr. Foster's intentions might have been driven by something far more manipulative than she imagined. Caught between conflicting feelings of loyalty and unease, she remained silent, unwilling to reveal the full truth to anyone. Luna's fear grew sharper when she stumbled upon something that made her question the very foundation of her relationship with Dr. Foster. She had been scrolling through old notes and emails, trying to make sense of her feelings and figure out how things had gone so far off course, when she found unsettling evidence that Dr. Foster had kept things hidden from her, things that suggested he had been manipulating her from the start. It was as if she were peeling back a layer of deception, discovering that her therapist, the person she had trusted most, had secrets darker than she could have imagined. This wasn't just an affair gone wrong. She now saw a calculated pattern in his behavior. Details in his messages and comments he had made during their sessions started to come back to her, pieces that now seemed less like guidance and more like control. It dawned on her that she had been drawn into his world not by accident, but by his own design. Dr. Foster had known exactly what he was doing, using her vulnerability to create an attachment he could manipulate. The trust she'd given him had only fed into a dynamic where he held all the power, leaving her vulnerable and dependent on his whims. For the first time, she considered that she might be in real danger. Desperate to break free, Luna decided she would confront Dr. Foster, armed with the evidence she had found. She hoped to end things on her terms, but fear gnawed at her. What if he reacted badly? What if he wouldn't let her go? She knew too much about him now, more than she wanted to, more than was safe. Her mind was filled with worst-case scenarios, and she started to take extra precautions, avoiding places where she might run into him, changing her routines, and keeping her phone close. The mounting tension and paranoia left her exhausted. She felt trapped in a twisted game she had never signed up for, one in which she had no control over the outcome. Determined to protect herself, Luna began documenting her experience. She made notes of their encounters, his unpredictable moods, the private messages he sent her after she stopped attending sessions. It was as if she were creating a map of her own nightmare, a record that she hoped would explain what she had gone through if anything happened to her. She wasn't sure where to turn or who would believe her. He was the respected professional, the figure of authority, while she was just another patient, one who, in the eyes of others, might be seen as troubled or overly attached. But Luna felt an urgency she couldn't ignore. She knew she needed proof, something solid that would show she was not just imagining things. As her paranoia grew, she distanced herself from everyone, afraid that involving anyone else might put them in danger. She became increasingly isolated, going days without speaking to friends or family, who grew increasingly concerned by her disappearance from their lives. She was falling apart under the strain of her own secrecy, haunted by the realization that she was effectively alone in her struggle. Every creak, every shadow outside her apartment felt ominous, a reminder of Dr. Foster's invisible hold over her life. She felt hunted, as if he were watching her every move, ensuring she stayed under his influence. Despite the precautions, Dr. Foster seemed to sense her pulling away. His messages became more frequent, veiled threats disguised as professional concern. The tone of his messages shifted from familiar to sinister, as if warning her not to go too far. He mentioned how much she meant to him and implied that he knew about her attempts to distance herself. The subtle menace in his words chilled her, a reminder that he was willing to use whatever power he had to keep her within his reach. Each message felt like a chain, tightening around her as she fought to break free. She deleted the messages, but their contents lingered in her mind, replaying in an endless loop of dread. Her last resort was to contact a support group for victims of professional misconduct, hoping for guidance or, at the very least, a sympathetic ear. But she hesitated, fearful that if she reached out it might somehow get back to him. The more she learned about cases similar to hers, the clearer it became that Dr. Foster fit a disturbing profile, one that involved manipulating vulnerable patients for his own ends, with no regard for their well-being. Her situation was no isolated incident, it was part of a calculated pattern, one he had likely enacted many times before. In those moments, Luna felt a suffocating hopelessness. She realized that the man she had once trusted as a healer was instead a predator, someone who had drawn her into a world where her vulnerabilities were exploited. She could no longer ignore the chilling truth that she was in over her head, tangled in a relationship where she held no power and, worst of all, no escape. Each revelation brought her closer to a terrifying reality. Dr. Foster had always been in control, and as far as he was concerned, he intended to keep it that way. One late evening, Luna was last seen at her apartment complex, looking anxious but determined. She told her closest friend she was going to confront Dr. Foster one final time. She planned to sever ties with him completely, hoping that a direct confrontation would make it clear she was done with him for good. Luna had prepared herself mentally for this moment, going over her words, rehearsing how she would tell him to stay out of her life. She wanted to reclaim control, to break free from the toxic attachment that had ensnared her. Yet, underneath her determination, she couldn't shake the feeling that this meeting might be dangerous. Still, she pressed on, hoping this step would finally bring her the peace she so desperately needed. Luna drove to Dr. Foster's office, parked her car nearby, and went inside, as confirmed by security footage from the building's entrance. Her heart pounded as she walked through the empty, dimly lit corridors. The building was nearly deserted, adding to her sense of dread. Luna was aware that no one else was around, and this realization only heightened her fear. But she forced herself to stay calm, telling herself this was her chance to end everything and escape his influence once and for all. Hours passed, but Luna did not return home that night. Her friends and family grew concerned when they couldn't reach her. Her phone calls went unanswered, and her usual social media activity stopped. Initially, they hoped she was just taking some time alone to recover. But as more time passed, concern turned into panic. Her closest friend, the one she had confided in, knew about her troubled relationship with Dr. Foster. With Luna's strange behavior over the past months and her decision to meet him one last time, her friend began to fear the worst. The worry turned unbearable, and eventually, a missing person report was filed. The police began an investigation, treating Luna's disappearance with urgency. Detectives interviewed her friends and family, learning about her complicated relationship with Dr. Foster and the fear she had felt in the days leading up to her vanishing. They checked her last known whereabouts and soon found the security footage showing Luna entering Dr. Foster's office building. However, to everyone's confusion and alarm, there was no footage showing her leaving. Her car was still parked outside, yet she was nowhere to be found. This discovery raised troubling questions about what had happened inside that building. As detectives dug deeper, they uncovered the documents Luna had been gathering in the days leading up to her disappearance. Among them were notes detailing her sessions with Dr. Foster, accounts of his erratic behavior, and the threatening messages he had sent her. Her writings painted a chilling picture of a relationship that had gone far beyond ethical boundaries, one that hinted at control, manipulation, and possibly even violence. Luna had been documenting every disturbing incident, seemingly preparing for the possibility that she might need evidence of his actions. These records became a critical part of the investigation, providing clues to Dr. Foster's dark side and revealing the mental and emotional hold he had maintained over her. When confronted, Dr. Foster claimed that he hadn't seen Luna for days and knew nothing about her disappearance. He played the part of a concerned professional, asserting that he had no inappropriate involvement with her beyond their therapeutic relationship. But as police examined his history, details began to emerge that cast serious doubt on his story. Witnesses came forward, some of them former patients, describing a pattern of boundary-crossing behavior. Many of them mentioned his tendency to form special connections with vulnerable patients, subtly manipulating them under the guise of therapy. For years, Dr. Foster had hidden behind his professional image, but now the veil was beginning to lift. Investigators also found troubling traces of Luna in Dr. Foster's office: a strand of her hair on his couch, a small earring that had fallen behind a table, and, most damning of all, a few drops of blood on the carpet near his desk. Forensic analysis confirmed that the blood belonged to Luna, contradicting Dr. Foster's claim that she hadn't been there recently. As the physical evidence mounted, Dr. Foster's carefully crafted facade began to crumble. He found himself under intense scrutiny, and public suspicion started to turn against him. The community that once trusted him now looked upon him with fear and doubt, horrified by the possibility that a respected therapist might be capable of harming one of his own patients. Despite the evidence, Dr. Foster continued to maintain his innocence. He claimed that Luna had been emotionally unstable, suggesting she had fabricated the documents as part of a delusional narrative. But her friends and family knew better, as did the detectives who had spent hours combing through her journals, piecing together the story of a woman trapped in a twisted relationship she could not escape. As the investigation continued, it became clear that Luna's disappearance was not random or accidental. She had been silenced just as she was attempting to free herself, and every shred of evidence pointed to Dr. Foster as the one who had stopped her from leaving. The investigation into Luna's disappearance intensified as detectives pursued every possible lead to uncover the truth. The community followed every development, stunned by the dark revelations emerging about Dr. Foster. Friends, family, and strangers alike were horrified that a trusted professional could potentially be behind such a heinous act. Though Luna's body hadn't been found, mounting evidence suggested she was unlikely to be alive, and the hunt to hold someone accountable became relentless. Forensic teams scoured Dr. Foster's office, his home, and any property he owned, leaving no stone unturned. They discovered more unsettling traces of Luna's presence: fingerprints on furniture where she shouldn't have been, stray hairs that were unmistakably hers, and a hidden notebook containing disturbing notes written in Dr. Foster's handwriting. The notebook was filled with cryptic references to his power over certain people, hinting at a twisted belief that he could manipulate his patients as he pleased. His writing spoke of breaking down boundaries and reaching the soul, phrases that, in the context of Luna's case, took on a menacing new meaning. Investigators also uncovered that Dr. Foster had a history of crossing ethical lines with previous patients, but until now, his actions had remained just shy of criminal. Former patients who came forward described unsettling instances where Dr. Foster had blurred the lines, making them feel dependent on him, creating emotional entanglements and exploiting their vulnerabilities. Luna was the first person who had been brave enough to document her experiences so meticulously, leaving a trail of evidence that exposed his predatory behavior. Under increasing scrutiny, Dr. Foster's demeanor shifted. No longer the calm, composed therapist, he became visibly agitated, unraveling as public opinion turned against him. News outlets published stories about his questionable practices, and the mounting pressure forced his clinic to place him on indefinite suspension. The police seized his devices, looking for any digital evidence that might link him to Luna's disappearance. On his phone, they found deleted messages, texts he had frantically erased before the investigation but hadn't successfully hidden. These messages revealed a disturbing escalation in his language and threats toward Luna, who had tried desperately to cut ties with him. The texts painted a clear picture of his possessiveness and anger, especially when she started to pull away. As days passed without new evidence, Luna's family grew increasingly desperate for closure. Public outcry grew louder, with calls for justice echoing through the community. Law enforcement felt the pressure mounting, as Luna's case became a haunting reminder of the dangers lurking beneath the surface in seemingly safe spaces. The community wanted answers, a resolution that would ease their fears and honor the memory of a young woman who had sought healing and instead met a tragic fate. Then, 1 week later, a breakthrough occurred. A hiker stumbled upon a shallow grave in a remote wooded area about an hour outside the city. Inside, authorities found a body that had been hastily buried and concealed. Forensic teams quickly identified it as Luna. She had suffered injuries consistent with a violent struggle, and the evidence left on her body pointed directly to Dr. Foster. DNA testing revealed traces of his skin under her fingernails, indicating she had fought back in her final moments, trying to defend herself against the man she had once trusted. With this discovery, detectives now had enough to make an arrest. Dr. Foster was taken into custody, his once pristine reputation now in shambles. He remained uncooperative during questioning, insisting on his innocence and painting Luna as a mentally unstable woman who had misinterpreted his intentions. But the evidence was undeniable: physical traces, damning messages, and witness testimonies all painted a portrait of a man who had exploited his position and harmed those who depended on him. The case shook the community, raising awareness of the dangerous power imbalance between vulnerable individuals and those entrusted with their care. As the case moved toward trial, Luna's family finally felt a bittersweet sense of justice taking shape. The memory of Luna became a rallying point, inspiring others to come forward with their own stories of boundary crossing and manipulation within professional settings. Her courage in documenting her experiences exposed a pattern of abuse that otherwise might have remained hidden. Though her life had been cut short, Luna's legacy grew beyond the walls of Dr. Foster's office, empowering others to protect themselves and seek accountability. At trial, Dr. Foster attempted to defend his actions by claiming he had been misunderstood, and that his approach to therapy was unconventional but not harmful. He tried to undermine Luna's character, framing her as overly dependent and emotionally fragile. But her documentation, combined with witness testimony and forensic evidence, was overwhelming. The jury deliberated, considering Luna's story in all its tragic detail. They saw a clear pattern of manipulation and abuse, recognizing that Dr. Foster had crossed professional boundaries repeatedly and used his influence over her in ways that ultimately led to her death. In the end, Dr. Foster was convicted of multiple charges, including murder. As the gavel fell, Luna's family felt a wave of both relief and grief. They had lost a beloved daughter, sister, and friend, but they had also uncovered the truth and ensured justice. Luna's story became a powerful warning, a tale of caution for anyone placing trust in another person's hands. Her case sparked reforms in mental health ethics, prompting the community to safeguard the vulnerable and scrutinize those in positions of power. Luna's memory lived on, reminding everyone who heard her story of the importance of boundaries, trust, and accountability. Her courage in facing her darkest moments and her determination to break free ultimately exposed the hidden dangers she encountered, ensuring her voice would not be silenced even after her tragic end.